Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about job hopping. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how often should one job hop? Should you try to stay for 2 years before moving on? It depends a little bit on you and sort of like what you're going for here. So I usually, at least the way I think about it, is that there are two perspectives about job hopping. One is the CV itself, sort of like what, as I, you may or may not have heard me say this before. Your CV is the store window, and it tells a story about the career that you have had, and that is usually the first thing people will see. So your career path and how long and where you work and these sorts of things, they reflect that CV, or like that CV then starts telling a story about you. And you can of course never know what people think about your CV when they read it and so forth, but I don't think it comes as news to anybody that if you have a lot of really high profile companies and so forth, that looks very, very good. If you don't really have anything there, it's harder. It's tougher to make people get a good gut feeling about that CV, and you may not get as many calls. And so that's the one thing when you have to consider, I argue, at least what I do when it comes to job hopping. The other perspective is your personal growth, and so those again can be divided up into two different things. At least for me, one is have you learned all the things at that given job, and the second thing is there a way for you to either increase your skills, like move horizontally in some fashion, or is there a vertical progression that is available to you? Those are the things that I usually consider the most when it comes to whether or not I'm going to stay at the job. And so I have this personal trick that you can use if you want to. It's very similar to how often I update something like my LinkedIn profile or so forth and so forth. I just put a reminder that comes every 6 months, something like that. A year doesn't have to be a really hard number or anything like that, but just a time period where there's a message to me asking just a simple question: Are you where you're supposed to be? Like, how you is it time to move on? And that just gives me a reminder that I should think about these three things and then sort of evaluate what would be my next move. And so if we start by talking about how my CV looks first and foremost, and how I argue that you should think about it. So in many cases, if you have a lot of short-term hires, like just a few months or something like that, then so forth, that will tell one story. If you have only, let's say, one single job for many, many, many years, that's going to tell another story. And so those are the two extremes usually. Either you have a lot of short-term stuff, or you have just one or two really, really long-term things. And what I usually say is that 1 to 2 years is roughly, based on my friends who have their own companies and so forth, and other managers and so forth. It's the sweet spot, I would say, for anyone who wants to have a, I'm not going to say a passing grade, but where you're just going to be average. Because the average time usually now a software developer job hop is between 2 to 4 years-ish, if you go by the statistics that Stack Overflow has posted a few times. It's that rough number. And so the reason why that is a very good number is because if you have less than a year, it's very like, or a lot of people associate that with incompetence, because and there is a clause here, and that is that you have worked at, say, a product company or something like that. You're not like a short-term hire, you're not like a temp or anything like that, because it usually takes about 6 months to a year at least for someone to get really into the work, really know everything. It depends on your seniority level, of course, but at the very least, most people will, I think, agree that after a year of working in a workplace, the you have sort of established yourself. Like, if you're still working after that, it's probably, most people read that as, all right, this was a good hire, or it was at least a decent hire because we didn't get rid of you immediately. If you have just a few weeks, a few months, that is a cause for questioning, because usually you don't have such a short-term hire unless there's a problem. That's not always true. As I said, you can very easy to explain these sort of things. As I said, if you're a consultant or a freelancer, or it's like a short-term thing, like it's a contract, there's tons of things like that you can use in order to explain the situation, right? But the main thing is that for most people who look at that as a glance type of thing, that's the thing that they might suspect. And so that's why I usually tell myself that whenever I take a job, I go in with the mindset that at least a year, that's what I'm going to have here. And that's not because I can't fuck up and just decide, yeah, I'm going to go somewhere else, but that is just for myself when I'm in the hiring process, so that if I get a really bad vibe and I kind of go, yeah, I'm probably going to have a lot of problems here, so forth and so forth, then it's not something that I want to do, because I know that with myself that I want a CV that is easy to digest for most people, and most people would find, as I was saying with the store window, I want a nice store window. I don't really care so much at the end of the day how it looks, but it's more about just making sure that the CV tells a good story about me, because even though I know that maybe if I had a really short-term hire, that's probably not it's not a problem, because once I get a chance to talk to people and so forth, they get a more in-depth understanding of who I am and what I know and what I don't know and so forth. But as I said, it's a store window. And the people who watch it, who look into it, they don't know how amazing all your stuff is inside of the store, and so you need to get them into the store, and then the real conversations start. And that's why I usually say 1 to 2 years. Now, the other perspectives that I usually have is that, okay, so as I said, there are two other things. Okay, so career progression and learning. And so here's the similar sort of thing. It really comes down to, where are you at this current stage in your career? So an example would be, if let's say we talk about learning. Now for me, who's been working for quite a few years now, the time it takes me to learn like the domain of a new company, it's pretty short. I'm not going to say that you learn all the things, but and I also go out of my way a little bit here, because I know that it's actually the thing that ties in the most to your career progression upwards, or like if you want to move around, or if you want to go like and get promoted and stuff like that. Knowing the domain is one part of it, and the technical skills are of course the other part of it. But it's something that doesn't really take all that long for me anymore. And so for me, if I were to only go with that, well, then working in any given company, unless it's something very new for me, like something that is highly niche, then again, I mean, it could potentially just be less than a year, but usually it's not the only thing. That's why I divide these things up into 3 different categories, because all of these 3 things together makes up my assessment of should I move on, or should I hop to the next job, or so forth. But at this stage, it's very rare that there's a lot of new technologies and things like that I need to master and so forth, because it's usually it used to be that case, like for a few years ago, for sure. Then this was an even bigger deal, because I still felt uncomfortable, or like I felt like I was learning technical things at my job. It's been a while since that was happening. The thing that usually keeps me around now is if the project itself has something to teach me, and that is something that I've spoken about in other videos, guys, where like you get to a point where it's not, Git is like any tool to you. You don't even reflect over that once upon a time it was a super complicated thing for you. For some people it still is, but your programming language, your IDE, like all of these things, you will learn them. I promise you will, if you just give it enough time. And it's going to be like, using a knife or a fork. It's something that you just do. You don't even remember that you didn't know how to do it. But once you get to that point, which I would argue that I have for quite a lot of things, then the next thing is, okay, so all the issues that you have in the company, like legacy code bases, different types of stakeholders, and how to set up processes, and like how to code the system in such a way that it works for that specific business case. If those things are still interesting, then I usually stick around, because it's those experiences that will get you to be really high value. Because I promise you guys, you will cap a little bit, a plateau, if you just become a senior and you don't really learn how to build different types of systems. Because as I like to say, like the coding itself is just a means to an end. It's the tools that you use. But if you have a background in building, high transaction, like high performance systems, or finance, or credit card companies, or like these sorts of domains where the systems that they are building, like the sum of all that code becomes something really awesome, that's worth staying for as well. because those experiences are enormously valuable to a lot of companies. Like a lot of companies are looking for people who not just have like technical knowledge, they have domain knowledge about a certain business area or a certain type of enterprise, or so forth and so forth. And then lastly, I consider, as I said, progression. And usually I say again, like for me, it's about proving myself, because at this stage in my career, I usually need, well, the career progressions that I look at is not like the simple stuff, like to go from, well, I'm not going to call that simple. I hope you understand me correctly when I say that to prove that you're not a junior anymore and get up to mid-level and so forth, it can be difficult, but it's usually something that can be a little bit more straightforward. In some cases, it might be easier to just go to another company. At the stage that I am right now, I have to basically promote myself and prove in a way that is more slightly more difficult. It's a little bit, imagine if you wanted to take, let's say that you're going to be the CEO of a new company or something like that. Well, that's not something you're just going to be able to like put in an application for and then that's going to be it, right? They're going to look at you having a really long history of proving certain things. And for me, who's trying to become this jack of all trades software developer who can do most of the things, for me to prove that I'm worthy of that I should have promotion, it will take me about 6 months to a year to do that, because it's you have to have some wins under your belt that has been seen by the people that you're in. Like I can't live on old merits. Sometimes like I will get a new job if I had like a really fancy title or something like that at a previous job, but when I'm in the new job I still have to it's sort of, you start the whole thing over again a little bit. You have to prove that you have actually done things and that you provide that really big value, and that usually takes a year. And then after that I have a conversation with my managers. I put forward my expectations of promotions and stuff like that, and as I've said before, if I get something that is not a very concrete, very super straightforward, yeah, we're gonna have a meeting at that time, like that, if they don't have a really clear roadmap for me for how my progression is gonna look or my salary increase or so forth and so forth, then I usually give myself a timer and I say something like, all right, I will give them a month and I will remind them about this. If I made, or 2 months, it doesn't matter, right? If they have made no progression, no concrete action has been taken, then I immediately start looking for another job in parallel. I might not hunt for it as rigorously, but I will, because basically what I do is that I raise the time it takes for the current company that I have to provide me what I'm requesting versus the time it would take me to get another job that gives me the same thing or even better. So what I want you to take away from this is that yes, I would say that 1 to 2 years is a pretty good number, all things considered, based on my experiences. If you want to build a pretty good CV, it's usually better to have several like having a really long job versus having very many short ones. Those are usually the extremes, and people have different opinions on what that means and so forth. So the sweet spot is usually to have a series, a few jobs that are between 1 to 4 years ish. That's usually the sweet spot, at least in these days. That's what I've found at the very least. And then when it comes to personal progression, yes, you're also going to need a while. Like for junior level software developers, it might be more, because it takes time to get really good at stuff. But once you're really good, or like you have a lot of seniority, it doesn't take all that long to learn all the things. And then what you should be thinking about is not so much the tech itself, but rather the company that you are working for, because your value will stop if you just look at the tech. Because I promise you, it sounds ridiculous, but at one point you're going to learn all the tools that you need so that you can basically build everything. You don't have to know every single library on the market, but you will know enough to build basically anything. And then the real question is, do you actually know how to use all those coding skills to build the sort of systems that the companies are all requesting? That's the next level, to learn how to build those sorts of systems. And then finally, progressions and things like that. That's also something I consider. It usually takes about, depending on how good you are, it will take you about this time as well, sometimes longer if you're really junior, to get to a point where people will say, yeah, you put up a track record here that we can use. Because usually when you have career progression discussions with your manager, they're going to ask you, okay, what have you done? Like they're going to ask you to prove what you've done. And that usually takes, at least it takes about 6 months to a year to get some stuff there, so I can actually make some good arguments. And then, as I said, if you feel that that's not really the thing, do my thing. Like just have a reminder to see if it's time to move on. And then, as I said, you can just start looking, casually look at something else and take the next leap. As long as you have around 1 to 2 years, it's usually fine. Have a great day.